Hi, I'm Osbert Lancaster, Director and Co-founder of Realize Earth. We help leaders realize their climate and sustainability ambitions by catalyzing purpose-led change in their organizations and beyond. Welcome to our podcast. In this episode, we're exploring how nature connection can help us become more effective sustainability leaders and changemakers. What you're about to hear are the edited highlights of our roundtable on nature connection and sustainability leadership. At the roundtable, I started things off by outlining why we believe nature connection is so important for sustainability leadership and change-making. We then opened the discussions with our panelists and guests, and our panel are Dr. Carly Butler, member of the Nature Connectedness Research Group at the University of Derby, Ruchir Shah, Director of External Affairs at Scottish Wildlife Trust, Jemma Sharman, Green Minds Programme Manager, Plymouth City Council, and Gwyn Jones, Director of the Association of Sustainability Practitioners. Let's get started.
So, earlier this year, the Stockholm Environment Institute and the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, big international institutions, produced a report to the UN called Stockholm+50, Unlocking a Better Future. And that claimed to synthesize up-to-date scientific evidence and analyze the intertwined human and environmental crises facing the world today. And it claimed to present some key actions that are needed to redefine the relationship between humans and nature and ensure lasting prosperity for all and to invest in a better future. So their key finding, the absolute top finding from all this evidence that they were reviewing, is that our relationship with nature needs to shift. It needs to shift from one of appropriation and extraction towards a relationship of protection and care. And they explained that, I'm quoting, human nature connectedness should be strengthened in social norms and in value systems, and in physical terms of how we live our everyday lives. So for many people like myself who've been working in this field for many years, this is both simultaneously extremely frustrating because we've been saying this sort of stuff for over 2 decades, but it's also a huge relief that respected international organizations are at last championing this perspective. But the recommendations in the report, I found them a bit odd and interesting, because they were all focusing on policymakers, and they're strangely sort of passive. Things will happen, policies will enact, and there's nothing really there about, well, what does that actually mean for people, sustainability leaders and change makers, or even actually policymakers? How does it change their lives? What do they do differently? So that's what we're really interested in. We're interested in what does this mean for sustainability leaders and change makers? So, if you're leading your business or your organization's sustainability agenda, what does shifting our relationship with nature actually mean for you? How does it relate to your work on a day-to-day basis? How does it relate to your business strategy? How do you actually go about it? Likewise, if you're designing and delivering sustainability programs with communities and other stakeholders, what does shifting our relationship with nature mean for program goals and activities? How could it change the way you and your team go about your work? So to set the scene for our discussions today, I want to offer my thoughts on what I think that might mean. And this is based on our experience of working in this area for many years and picking up particularly on 2 programs. One is nature-based sustainability leadership retreats, essentially a week of deep nature connection in the Highlands of Scotland, which we've been doing for many years. And more recently, in the last year or so, a program working with Jemma and her colleagues at Plymouth City Council, the Green Minds Project. Those are the 2 bits of our experience that I'm particularly drawing on here. So there are 4 bits to this. The first bit is why nature connectedness can make us more effective sustainability leaders and change makers. So you'll have heard a lot in the last few years, particularly in the pandemic, about how spending time in nature can make us all healthier and happier. And that's absolutely true. But being connected with nature can actually I believe, can make you a more effective sustainability leader and change maker, and for reasons you might not expect. Let's start with the reality that we are part of nature. It's pretty obvious. You've only got to think about basic biology and evolution to realize humans are part of nature. But the culture we live in inevitably shapes our minds. It subliminally trains us to think and behave as if we're separate from and in control of the rest of the living world. The problem is that centuries of thinking and behaving like this is one of the root causes of the climate and nature crises. And we're not going to fix the climate nor let nature recover if we keep trying to find solutions that use the same thinking that caused the problems in the first place. Part of the solution is to develop a strong sense of nature connectedness. Nature connectedness is when we psychologically and emotionally feel part of nature, not just rationally understand that we are, but feel it in our bones. Developing a strong sense of connectedness can help make us better, more effective sustainability leaders and change makers. Why is that? What research has shown is that people have a low sense of nature connectedness, they have poor mental health, and they tend to be unhappy. They tend to feel that life is more random and pointless. They tend to be more self-centered and unwilling to help others. They tend to behave in ways that damage the environment. Now, obviously, feeling and behaving like this isn't good for oneself, it's not good for the people around you, and it's not good for the planet. On the other hand, people of high nature connectedness tend to have good mental health and to be happy. They tend to have a strong sense of meaning and purpose in their lives, and they tend to be kind and helpful to others, and to behave in ways that are good for the environment. So, nature connectedness is good for everybody, but it has particular relevance for sustainability leaders and change makers. Not only will we individually be healthier and happier and more motivated and less likely to be burnt out, but nature connectedness helps inoculate us against the dominant mindsets in our culture, so that we are more likely to act for the greater good and more likely to seek out solutions that work with and not against nature. So I want to come on to my second bit here about why nature connectedness is good for society. So nature connectedness can help make us better sustainability leaders and change makers, and that's important and it's nice for us. But more people feeling part of nature could actually transform our businesses, our universities, non-profits, government departments, and indeed society. That transformation will help take us towards the social tipping points that are essential if we're going to tackle the climate and nature crisis. And that's because people's sense of nature connectedness, psychologically and emotionally feeling part of nature, has a huge effect on how they feel and how they behave. Remember, they're going to have better mental health, they're going to be a stronger sense of purpose, they're going to be kinder and helpful to others, and they're going to behave in ways that are good for the environment. Imagine what our neighborhoods and entire populations could be like if everyone felt much more part of nature. We'd all experience greater well-being, we'd all be more caring of other places and other people, and we'd be more likely to support actions that tackle social and environmental problems. The same principles apply to organizations. Imagine what it would be like if the people in your organization and its supply chain felt part of nature. Organizations would be better places to work, their mission would be more aligned with local and global needs, and their strategy and culture would support ways of working that restore and regenerate the natural world. Am I suggesting some kind of mass conversion to tree hugging? Well, my script is absolutely not, but sort of in a subtle way. Because nature connectedness is a very real phenomenon, and we can subtly weave it into our sustainability leadership and change making to great effect. It doesn't have to come across as tree huggy or eco-freaky. So how do you develop nature connectedness yourself? People develop greater nature connectedness through spending time outdoors in parks and gardens and woodlands and on hills and by rivers and lakes and the sea. But it's not just where you are, it's what you do there. Spending time outdoors in green and what they call blue places isn't enough. Research has identified the activities that will strengthen nature connectedness. That's exploring and experiencing nature through all our senses, seeking out and appreciating the beauty of the natural world, noticing and welcoming the feelings that nature inspires in you, celebrating and sharing nature's events and stories, and actively caring for nature. Nature connection isn't just a one-off dose. It's strengthened and maintained by regular activities outdoors in nature. And here's what that might look like in practical terms. Trying to spend some slow time outdoors every day, in experiencing and noticing and appreciating nature, getting out into wilder places every few weeks or so, making time for a deeper immersion in nature every few months, and getting your hands dirty in practical actions to care for nature, like nature-friendly gardening, conservation volunteering, and stuff like that. If you get started right away and keep going, I really believe you will feel better and be a more effective sustainability leader and change maker. What about developing nature connectedness in others? The findings of that Stockholm+50 report suggest that one of the most important things we can do as sustainability leaders and change makers is to strengthen other people's nature connectedness as well as our own. Whatever your role, you can try to strengthen other people's nature connectedness by influencing those around you. You can bring nature into both informal and professional conversations. And you can do this by sharing your own feelings and experiences of nature in ways that feel appropriate to those conversations, and by talking about the seasons and the natural cycles that we're all experiencing in our day-to-day lives. And you can also lead by example by creating opportunities for colleagues and those you work with to spend time outdoors by having walking meetings or organizing outdoor workshops. Depending on what your organization does and your role in it, you might also be able to do more. If you're designing projects and programs, you can create opportunities for people to experience nature in this way. If you're working on comms, you can find relevant ways to highlight and celebrate that we're part of nature. If you're involved with organizing events or with managing places, you can create opportunities for people to explore and appreciate nature in these ways. So, developing nature connectedness isn't a magic bullet that will instantly transform things, but I firmly believe in two things here. Firstly, that if we develop our own nature connectedness, we will be more effective at what we're trying to do in the world. And secondly, the more we can help other people in organizations and communities to develop a strong sense of being part of nature, the healthier and happier they will be, and the greater chance there is that we will reach the social tipping points that we need in society to tackle the climate and nature crises.
After that presentation, we invited the panel and our guests to move into twos and threes to reflect on what I'd said in the light of their experience of nature connectedness and sustainability leadership. When they came back, the panelists and guests shared their insights and experience with the whole group. What comes next are the edited highlights from that discussion, arranged in three broad themes. First, why nature connectedness is important if you care about the climate and nature crises. Then, some issues and challenges around how do you raise levels of nature connectedness in individuals, groups, and societies. And finally, what can we, as sustainability leaders and change makers, do next?
Well, I think Osbert's summary at the beginning was brilliant, really captured the importance of it, the value of it, the absolute need for it at this point, and particularly the point about helping the other people and kind of having an organization itself becoming more nature connected. The fact that we get into the culture of an organization is the really important thing, because I think so much of the time there are people who are connected to nature, but we need more people connected to nature, and the way the whole world is kind of functioning hinges on a different sort of relationship with nature.
The conversation I was in with Jason and Sarah, it seems to stem very much from the disconnect from nature. So we focus very much on the nature crisis and how that's feeling and everything that's going on right now, wars, pandemics, and everything else are distracting us. So it's almost like all these things that we're trying to deal with have actually derived from our neglect of nature or exploitation of nature. And yet that's what's causing us to kick the can down the road and not deal with the issues at hand.
We were running a journey of a few years down in Plymouth and had a real opportunity with an EU funded programme that we're running around urban rewilding people and places. As part of that, we started to look at actually how were we going to transform our land management in Plymouth. So not just about the city council land, but wider land managers in Plymouth as well. And doing a bit of research, we came into contact with Carly and the Miles Richardson's work around nature connectedness. It seemed to offer a really good framework. And we really started looking at it for individuals and communities about how we can, all our activities, our work, our communications could support nature connectedness. We started looking at it very much at an individual level, but quickly realised that there's a chance to then start to scale up that work. What does our placemaking look like if our placemaking is through a lens of nature connectedness? And as part of that, we also wanted to work in the professional sector as well. So not just with land managers, but also other sectors. And that's really where our conversations with Osbert came about. And we ran a nature-based leadership program over the last year. So a combination of online and experiential in Plymouth as well. Just thinking about the conversations that we had in our group, we talked a lot about those different points in the system that you can work out with nature connectedness. So it can be individual levels, can be around wider scale shifts as well. The nature connectedness framework and the work at Derby has helped us build that evidence base and demonstrate impact. We also talked about the challenge of the scale of the disconnect that we all know and recognise, and how you work using different hooks, different points of the system to reach out to those audiences as well.
In terms of discussion that we had, what the thing that's key is the importance of the body's role in this. Particularly from my perspective, I'm dealing with the research and the reasoning behind it all. It's all very intellectual in the way in which we talk about it. You know, you need the facts and the reasons and the science behind it. But when it comes down to it, nature connectedness, as Sophia was saying beautifully, is an embodied experience.
I would say that in the Western world, that through our education, through our upbringing, we are encouraged to be in our head. More people now are able to come from their heart and become less afraid of that, but to actually be in the body, which is perhaps the third level, is not something that people are going to do naturally. There's a lot of perceived resistance to implementing measures of sustainability by leaders and managers. And perhaps if there were not only intellectual arguments being made, but perhaps if a more holistic framework and management can be used that enable people to learn through activities through the body. No, there's all sorts of activities that can be designed that are fun ways of learning in a very new dimension to most people, so that you're including the body and getting in touch with your own nature.
I'm often struck by how naturally and easily children relate to nature, and then how that gets lost when people will start moving through the education system. So part of my interest in working with teenagers is to bring back that sense that nature is relevant. We're social creatures, so we socially normalize ourselves. We look at others around us to see what's relevant and important. And then we start to think, oh, well, nature's not that important. So I'm interested in the more messages that society can give out that nature is important and we do belong here and all that kind of stuff, then the more people are going to start to not feel embarrassed to admit that, their favorite thing is to listen to birds or whatever.
I think there's an aspect here about socializing how we connect with nature. So not just how we connect with nature as individuals, but how we connect with other people in order to connect with nature. What makes us really terrified and overwhelmed is when the whole weight of the crises, climate to nature is put on our shoulders as individuals. But when we share it, when we connect with other people, there's a social element to it, which allows us to share and also to reconnect with each other at the same time as reconnect with nature. There's something in that community approach to nature connectedness that I'd be very keen to explore more as well.
I'd just like to bring in how we reach those most marginalised groups and looking at the Natural England data about who is the most disconnected with nature, making that our starting point. I'm connected to the conservation sector, which does sadly a really dire job on connecting people with, ethnic diversity, people living with disability. Reading, where I live, is a city of sanctuary, and there's a lot of refugee support groups. And I thought that nature connection could be something that would be valuable. But that took about 3 months of attending drop-in groups and engagement and co-designing a program that really would support those groups. I'm a trustee of the Wildlife Trust in my region here as well. And I just find sometimes there's these wonderful nature reserves and they're sitting there thinking, oh, why doesn't everyone come to us? And I just think if we step out and meet people where they are and maybe think of nature not always as this wonderful, far away, pristine nature, but making the most of those nature spots that might be a funny little bit of scrappy grass and a scruffy tree in the middle of a housing estate, that can be then a stepping stone to a much deeper nature connection. Do you think we really need to take that into account, or we're in danger of connecting people who already are connected with nature even more with nature?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Natalie. The other thing I would say, working where I do with maybe a lot of decision makers and professionals across different sectors, is also how people can connect in their personal lives. So you can have people go surfing at the weekend, they volunteer for a wildlife trust or have their wildlife cams up. I know senior managers in multiple organisations do this, and then come to work and make decisions about a road that takes out ancient trees or whatever those decisions are. So I'm also really interested in that kind of deeper nature connection approach that Realise Earth work with and the work of Carly is. Then it's about, if you allow yourself that deeper connection, that you will bring your whole self to work. And I think that is a really big part of shifting the decision making and our actions. Because I see this really often, that a lot of professionals really value nature in their own lives and their families' lives, but they don't bring that decision making into work life.
We did talk a little bit about how you can personalize and localize engagement with nature. And that makes it a bit more real for people. And it gives an opportunity for people to connect, and how these small things that people do can add up to a whole. And I think there is still a little bit of feeling of, we're a little bit stuffed. The Stockholm Report's not exactly the most positive reading. We are shooting all sorts of targets all the time. So it's hard not to get despondent. The kind of background I'm in, nature connectedness is something that we see as a solution. Let's say we, the Wildlife Trust and others that are involved in the environmental NGO space, reconnecting with nature is one of the ways in which people can both find a bit more meaning and also start to value the role they have in protecting and nurturing and supporting nature around them, which can only be a positive.
I spent 4 or 5 years down at Embercombe. It's a self-sustaining community in 50 acres in Devon, where you harvest your dinner. You plant the next food for years in that. So you learn to live in contact with nature. And for me, that's where people have their epiphanies, is when they've got their hands in the soil. The thing that confuses, or not confuses me, but is that how do you make it personal to somebody? And I use a quote from Gus Speth, who's a US environmentalist, and he made this realization that actually, as an environmental scientist, he has no way of tackling the core problems, because the core problems we have are actually apathy, greed, and self-interest. But of course, we can work with those. We've all got greed, apathy, and self-interest. So why is it my interest to be in harmony and balance with nature? There's an old Peruvian saying, when we forget to nurture what nurtures us, everything dies. I've converted that to a positive. When we learn to nurture what nurtures us, everything lives. And what nurtures us is nature. So it's in our interest to nurture nature, because then it will nurture us. And how do you get people to switch onto that? I think it goes back to what Michael was saying to our group, is get them in nature. And what Julia was realizing through the call was stop working with the senior management. Get permission to take the staff into nature, because there's lots more voices, there's lots more experiences. You're bound to have more people have their epiphanies when they're in nature to come back and help change the approach of the organization from the bottom up.
Jemma made a fantastic point about this weird disconnect we seem to have with our personal lives and our business life often. And it's something I really wrestle with when I'm working with businesses, is how much can I broach into people's personal lives when you're trying to work with them in their business. If you're a semiconductor company, how do you link that to nature? I always try and do that with businesses I work with, always try to make it relevant to people, give people a sense of what's the real purpose behind this business. And when it comes to nature, the unifying thing is always food, because people will eat, even at work, they have to eat. So that sort of sense of trying to connect people to the food they're eating. If there's nothing else, you can always bring it back to food.
Struck by what Sophie had said, because it's very hard if someone's very disconnected to nature, and to break through that just doesn't happen in an instant unless there's some major event. So I feel like in many ways, you somehow need to focus on people that are at the edge, and they're starting to wake up to, oh, what's all this nature about? And do I feel part of this? And it's a journey of exploration. But I feel like we'd be wasting our time going to some people that are so disconnected. I feel we need to target that group. Their minds are more open and their hearts are more open. So I'm not quite sure how to do that, but to me, that seems like a pathway to early success rather than a kind of blanket approach.
I was linking with what Callum said about reaching people who aren't normally connected. So we were doing a project that involved trying to bring on board conservation volunteers to support local biodiversity. We purposely didn't use the word conservation, didn't use the word volunteering, and didn't use the word biodiversity. I think we used tea and cake and stuff like that.
There have been various references in the chat to Mr. Spock and his relationship with humpback whales. And to me, there's something fundamentally around the connection between creativity and our relationship to nature that is maybe a bridge towards reconnecting. Much of that is around the narratives, telling the stories of how these things happen and how leaders might help these things to happen. But a lot of it is about the stories. And I've been involved in a thing called Throughtopia, which is a fantastic idea around helping writers to create narratives and create stories that lead people from where we are now to a positive future, and actually show the steps in a narrative form and explain how we get there. But my point really is that it may be creatives who are in a position to lead the process of connection to nature.
We were doing a project which in partnership with a local charity that supported Muslim women, and there was a recognition. There was quite a lot of fear of going outdoors and connecting with nature. We had some funding to do a sort of walking program, and it was pretty tricky. We designed it very carefully together, but there was a lot around fear of dogs and uneven terrain, and stepping out to these nature spaces was really, really challenging. And then very much using creativity as a conduit to nature. We used mindful photography, helping people hone in on aspects of nature using their phones, and people were just taking these lovely photographs. And then later on in the WhatsApp group, someone shared a picture and said, "What's this? I've seen it on a bush outside my house. It's so beautiful." And it was a leaf of ivy that they were sharing. And it was just that waking up that whole awe and wonder of nature. And then it was just like right in an everyday space outside someone's house.
So, for example, someone participating in the program, she's an architect by background. She chairs the local REBA organization, works a lot with the construction industry. And now, instead of it just being about net zero, how we're going to reduce carbon in the construction industry, actually she's building the whole nature connectedness work into that. It's really interesting how those ideas can kind of infiltrate as well. As somebody who works in both the policy and practitioner sphere, I can't deal with any more policy recommendation reports. We know what needs doing, it's the how. So having those really practical recommendations, examples, case studies about how you implement that change. But I think that's the power, because that people see that change, then they can be part of that change. My dream vision in Plymouth would be this rewilding movement, this nature connectedness movement that everybody feels part of.
There you have it. So many interesting insights and experiences, and so little time. I'd love to get deeper into some of the issues our panel and guests raised, and I plan to do that on future episodes. In the meantime, I hope what you've heard will inspire you to strengthen your nature connectedness and to bring nature connection into your sustainability leadership and change making. You'll find links to useful resources for this and some of the projects mentioned in the show notes. If you'd like to join us live at future events like this, make sure you're subscribed to Realize, our newsletter. Every couple of weeks, we'll send you details of upcoming events along with information and resources that are genuinely useful, especially if you're responsible for climate and sustainability initiatives in your department, program, or organization. You'll find the sign-up form on our homepage at realize.earth. That's all for now, and whatever else you do, make sure to get outside, slow down, notice, and appreciate the living world.